Who were the very first people to ever call Norway home? When most people think of Norway, their minds jump straight to the Vikings, tall, fierce seafarers with long ships cutting across icy waters. But the truth is, long before the Vikings, long before kings and kingdoms, there were people who walked this land. Their names are forgotten, their voices lost, but their footprints remain, etched in the soil of history. To picture their story, we must travel far back in time, more than 12,000 years ago, when Norway was not yet the green, forested land we know today. Instead, it was a world caught between ice and life. Gigantic glaciers still clung to mountains and valleys. The air was sharp and cold, the ground scarred by centuries of ice. Yet slowly, the earth was changing. The glaciers began to melt. Rivers carved through stone. Fjords, those deep, majestic waterways Norway is famous for, were being born. Animals like reindeer, seals, and fish spread across the land, offering food for whoever dared to follow. And then, one day, they came, the first Norwegians. Their story is rarely told in classrooms or documentaries. It is a hidden history, overshadowed by the glory of the Viking Age. But without these first settlers, there would be no Vikings, no Norse myths, no Norway as we know it. Today, we will uncover their world, who they were, how they lived, and what kind of life they carved out of one of the harshest landscapes in Europe. Imagine standing in Norway 12,000 years ago. The land is wild and raw. Ice still stretches across the high mountains. The sea levels are lower, exposing land that today lies underwater. The ground is bare, dotted with tundra plants, small shrubs, moss, and hardy grasses. But things are changing quickly. The earth is warming. The once icy deserts are becoming alive. Birch trees begin to grow, followed later by pine and spruce. Rivers rush with fresh water from melting ice, and the coastline, rich with fish and seals, becomes one of the most valuable places for survival. This transformation is what made human life possible. For thousands of years before, Norway was simply too frozen, too unwelcoming for people to live. But as the glaciers retreated, a new opportunity opened. Animals migrated northward, following the fresh pastures and open water. Reindeer herds in particular became like moving rivers of life, supplying meat, skins, and bones. Where the reindeer went, humans would follow. The land that seemed empty was suddenly full of promise. And so the first bands of people arrived, explorers of a new world. So, who were these first Norwegians? They were hunter-gatherers, small groups of families moving together, carrying their lives on their backs. Most historians believe they came from continental Europe, traveling north as the ice melted, possibly through Denmark and southern Sweden. They did not arrive all at once, but wave after wave, over centuries. Archaeologists tell us about two main cultures that appeared in Norway around this time: the Fosna culture in the south and the Komsa culture in the north. The Fosna people lived along the western coast of Norway. They used sharp stone tools, spears, and arrows to hunt reindeer, seals, and seabirds. They built temporary camps near the water, always moving, always chasing food. Their world was centered on the coast, on the fish, shellfish, and sea mammals that gave them life. Far to the north, the Komsa culture thrived in the Arctic regions. Life there was even harsher. They relied heavily on the sea, hunting seals and whales, carving tools from bone and stone. Their survival depended on understanding the rhythms of the sea and the migration of animals. Both groups were masters of adaptation. With no farms, no permanent houses, no written language, they survived by knowing the land, the seasons, and the animals better than anyone else. Their tools were simple but effective. Flint knives, scrapers, and spearheads shaped from stone. Wooden shafts tipped with sharp edges. Canoes carved from wood or stretched with animal skin. Every object they carried was designed with survival in mind. When we imagine them, we must not think of a primitive people barely getting by. Instead, picture skilled survivors, clever in their knowledge of nature, able to read the sky, the tracks of animals, and the flow of rivers. They were pioneers, courageous enough to walk into a land that was still half frozen and call it home. But what was daily life like for these first Norwegians? They lived in small groups, maybe 20 to 30 people at most, often extended families. Community was everything. Alone, a person could not survive the long winters. Together, they shared food, built shelters, and cared for children. Fishing was central to their lives. The cold Norwegian seas were filled with cod, salmon, and herring. With hooks carved from bone and nets woven from plant fibers, they caught enough to feed whole groups. The coast was like a pantry, always stocked if you knew how to take from it wisely. Reindeer hunting was another way of life. These animals were not only food, but also clothing and tools. Their skins became warm coats, their antlers were carved into tools, and their sinews were used as string. Nothing was wasted. Boats and canoes allowed them to travel quickly along the coastlines and rivers. Even in the earliest days, the sea was not a barrier but a pathway, connecting groups across Norway's jagged shores. Navigation skills, even with simple means, became a lifeline. For shelter, they used caves when possible, natural stone walls offering safety from the cold and storms. In other places, they built huts from wood, stone, and animal hides. Fires burned at the center, where families gathered for warmth and storytelling. And perhaps the most fascinating clues we have about their lives are the rock carvings they left behind. Across Norway, you can still see ancient petroglyphs, images scratched into stone thousands of years ago. They show animals, boats, and hunting scenes. These carvings were not just art. They may have been spiritual, a way of recording beliefs or asking for success in the hunt. Life was not easy. Winters were long and brutal. Food could run short. Illness and injury were constant dangers. But somehow, these people endured. They developed knowledge and traditions that would echo through generations, shaping the culture of Norway long before the age of kings and Vikings. The story of the first Norwegians is wrapped in mystery. Who were they really? Where did they come from? For a long time, archaeologists only had tools, bones, and stone carvings to give us clues. But in recent years, science has opened a new window into the past. DNA research. When scientists studied the remains of these ancient people, they discovered something surprising. The first Norwegians were not from just one place. Their DNA showed connections to different groups across Europe, and even as far as the vast Eurasian steppe, a massive grassland stretching from Eastern Europe into Central Asia. This tells us something important. Norway's earliest people were not a single, isolated tribe. They were the result of multiple migration waves. Some came from the south and west, following the melting ice and chasing the reindeer herds. Others traveled from the east, bringing different traditions, tools, and ways of life. Over time, these groups met, mixed, and created something new, a unique blend of cultures that shaped Norway's earliest identity. Think about it. The Norway we know today, with its strong sense of national pride, began as a land of many peoples. People from different directions, carrying different bloodlines, came together in a rugged corner of the world. They shared knowledge of hunting, fishing, and survival. They traded ideas and skills. Slowly, a distinct culture began to form, one that would endure for thousands of years. But even with these discoveries, mysteries remain. We still don't know exactly how these groups interacted. Were they always peaceful? Or did they sometimes clash over territory and resources? Did they see themselves as one people or as separate tribes simply sharing the same land? What we do know is that this mixture of peoples laid the foundation for the Norwegians who would come after. In their blood, in their traditions, in their ways of life, we see the first building blocks of a culture that would one day give birth to the legendary Norse. So what did these early Norwegians believe? What gave meaning to their lives beyond survival? To answer that, we must look at the petroglyphs, the ancient rock carvings scattered across Norway. If you were to walk along a rocky shore or climb into the hills today, you might still find these carvings etched thousands of years ago. They show boats, animals, hunting scenes, and strange shapes that speak of a world both practical and spiritual. One common image is the boat. Even in these early times, the sea was central to life. The boat was more than just transportation, it was survival, a way to fish, to move between settlements, to follow the animals. But carved into stone, boats may also have carried a deeper meaning. Perhaps they represented journeys, not only across water, but also into the afterlife. Animals also appear again and again. Elk, reindeer, bears, fish, creatures that were hunted and respected. These images suggest that animals were not seen as mere food, but as spiritual beings, connected to survival and perhaps even worshipped. Some carvings show human figures holding weapons or standing in ritual poses. Could these be early shamans or leaders? We cannot be sure, but they hint at ceremonies, traditions, and beliefs about the unseen world. It's possible that the seeds of Norse mythology were already being planted here. The deep respect for nature, the belief in spirits, the sense that gods and powers moved in the world around them, these ideas may have begun in the Stone Age, long before Odin and Thor were named. Art, then, was not just decoration. It was memory. It was faith. It was communication with the invisible. In every line carved into rock, we see how these people tried to understand the forces that ruled their lives. The sea, the animals, the sky, and the mysteries of life and death. Over time, life in Norway began to change. The hunter-gatherer way of life, which had lasted for thousands of years, slowly gave way to something new: farming. Around 4,000 years ago, people began to settle more permanently. They learned to plant crops and keep animals like cattle, sheep, and goats. Instead of always moving in search of food, they could now stay in one place, building villages and growing communities. This was the beginning of the Bronze Age in Norway. The tools they used changed too. Instead of stone, they began working with bronze, a metal made by mixing copper and tin. Bronze weapons, axes, and jewelry began to appear, shining symbols of a new age. With farming came trade. People exchanged goods not only within Norway, but also across Scandinavia and beyond. Bronze itself was not found in Norway, which meant it had to be brought in from faraway places. This tells us that even in these early times, Norwegians were part of a larger network of connections stretching across Europe. This transition was more than just technology, it was cultural. Farming changed how people saw the land. No longer just a place to hunt and gather, it became territory to own, fields to protect, and homes to pass down through generations. Society grew more organized, roles shifted, leaders, warriors, and traders began to stand out. These shifts laid the foundation for what would one day become Viking society. The skills of sailing, trading, and surviving in harsh environments were already centuries old. The sense of community, the value of strength, the respect for the land and sea, all of these were carried forward into the Viking Age. So when we imagine the Vikings setting sail on their great journeys, we must remember they were building on a story that began thousands of years earlier with the first Norwegians. The legacy of these first Norwegians is extraordinary. They were survivors in one of Europe's toughest environments. They were not kings, not warriors of legend, not builders of empires. They were families, hunters, farmers, and dreamers. And yet their resilience shaped everything that came after. The way they adapted to the cold, the way they mastered the sea, the way they blended cultures from across Europe, all of this became part of the fabric of Norwegian identity. Their traditions, their art, and even their beliefs flowed into the culture that would later give rise to Norse mythology, sagas, and legends. And yet, their story remains mostly untold. Why? Perhaps because they left no written records. Perhaps because their lives seemed too ordinary compared to the Vikings who came later. But without them, there would have been no foundation on which the Viking Age could stand. They deserve to be remembered, not as a footnote before the Vikings, but as the true pioneers of Norway. So now we return to the question we began with. Who were the first people to ever call Norway home? They were the hunters who followed the reindeer, the fishers who braved the seas, the artists who carved animals into stone, the farmers who tamed the soil, and the dreamers who built the first sparks of a culture. They were the survivors of the Ice Age, the pioneers of the fjords, the forgotten ancestors of a proud land. When we speak of Norwegian identity, should we really begin with the Vikings? Or should we look deeper, back to those who came thousands of years earlier, whose courage and creativity made everything else possible? Their story reminds us that history is not only about heroes and battles. It is also about ordinary people who faced extraordinary challenges and endured. If this untold story made you see Norway in a new light, share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think life was like for these first Norwegians? And if you want more hidden history, more forgotten beginnings, make sure to subscribe and join us on this journey into the past. Because every story we tell brings us closer to understanding where we come from and who we are.